In this corner, the 2018 DC Multiverse Batman Reborn by Mattel. And in this corner, the 2024 Platinum Edition DC Multiverse Batman Reborn by McFarlane Toys. Which DC Multiverse Dick Grayson is the best bat for your buck? Place your bets and stick around. It's time for another Versus. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation. Starting with the packaging, and while both boxes might say DC Multiverse, they are very different. McFarlane comes in that standard black, white, and blue that we're accustomed to. Only difference is that fancy schmancy Platinum Edition sticker. Otherwise, the spine tells us it's Batman Reborn, the UPC tells you where you can find it, and the back is just a large comic book cover image. Mattel has a predominantly blue motif with a spot varnish diamond pattern, character art on the front and side, and then on the back there's a bio, a Build-A-Figure, in this case Killer Croc, and a selection of all the other available figures. An argument could be made that the Mattel boxes are a bit busy, but they're a lot more colorful, more detailed, but more importantly, informative. For packaging, this round goes to Mattel. Moving on to presentation, and Mattel stands at 6.5 inches, or about 17 centimeters. McFarlane stands at 7 inches, or 18 centimeters, and is a simple palette swap of the regular black and gray edition. And both those figures are just slightly modified versions of Nightfall. If you saw my previous video on Batman Reborn, you'd know I'm pretty happy with the updates here. The new belt is perfect. They did a great job on the cuffs. These new taser knuckle duster hands are fun, and since the costume is blue this time, that technically means there is a bit more paint detail. I'm mostly happy with the new head sculpt, though as I said last time, I can't help but wonder if maybe the ears bulge out just a bit too far. Also, as much as I do love the wired capes, I would like to see them start from here instead of back here. My biggest issue is that there are two figures at all, and that one of them is a platinum. The Dick Grayson bat costume is clearly blue and gray, so this should have been the main release. And then instead of a platinum, they could have done this version as a separate release months later, similar to what they did with the two versions of Nightfall and Hush. This way, both would have been readily available, and everyone would have been happy. That said, and even with this version, I do have one major criticism. The blue is way too bright. Say what you will about the Mattel version, but that navy blue is spot on. As for which head I like better, I'm a bit divided. McFarlane has the better detail and paint, but I do like the overall shape and that little smirk on the Mattel. I also like that the cowl comes to a comics accurate point, even if the cape is objectively worse. Seriously, this little see-through strip is all you get. Similar to McFarlane, and the belt and cuffs are very nicely sculpted, though it kind of feels like he doesn't have any groin. Old school Mattel DC figures had these swivel hinge hips. In a static pose they look great. In practice though is a different story. Here, Mattel had just started experimenting with ball joints, and as such the legs do look a bit bandy. The symbols are a perfect match though, and have been painted very nicely, but unlike McFarlane, Mattel gives us a bit of extra shading. The Mattel figure has personality. I particularly appreciate the more comics accurate colors, but the cheap cape and lower half really hold it back. For presentation, this round goes to McFarlane. If you're enjoying this video so far, do me a favor and give it a like. Moving on to Posability, and while the differences aren't going to surprise you, some of the similarities might. Mattel's head is on a ball joint with a very tiny disc swivel, whereas McFarlane is on a dumbbell joint. Mattel can actually look up a little bit higher, but down is about the same. Little bit of wobble on Mattel, but no real tilt. Leastways not like DC Multiverse, but both get all the way around. Moving down, both figures can raise their arms 90 degrees. Additionally, both figures have bicep swivel, but whereas Mattel merely has single-jointed swivel elbows, McFarlane has double-jointed elbows with a perfect bend. All Mattel's wrists can do is swivel and hinge up and down, whereas McFarlane has wrist balls that can swivel and hinge either up and down or side to side. Moving to the middle, and this is one of the biggest differences between the two. Mattel has an ab crunch and a waist swivel, while McFarlane has a diaphragm joint and a dumbbell waist. No arch back at all with Mattel, but McFarlane's is fantastic, though Mattel has the edge in the hunching forward department. That said, all Mattel's waist can do is twist side to side, while McFarlane can twist, but most importantly tilt side to side. Below the utility belt, Mattel has ball jointed hips, whereas McFarlane's system is a little bit more complicated. McFarlane easily has the higher kick, but both figures can do perfect splits. No doubt it's due to Dick Grayson's years of acrobatic training. Traveling down the leg, and even though McFarlane has a great amount of twist in the hip, Mattel has thigh cut. Surprisingly, both figures have double jointed knees, but even more surprising, Mattel is pinless. McFarlane, however, has toe ticulation, but while both figures' ankles can swivel and hinge, only McFarlane has pivot. Coming, I'm sure, as a surprise to no one, for Posability, this round goes to McFarlane. Moving on to Playability, and not surprisingly, there's some pretty big differences between the two here as well. First things first, McFarlane comes with a trading card and a figure stand. It's the same one that came with the regular edition, but if you want to read what it says, pause here. McFarlane also has a pair of accessory holding hands, so in that regard he's similar to Mattel. Neither one comes with accessories you can hold, but I'm guessing both companies figured you had enough Batman accessories to make it work. He's also got these grabby, gestury monologue hands. This allows for some very dramatic display options, but while I appreciate the knuckle dusters, I also would have appreciated a regular set of fists. In my video on the regular edition, I talked about how you can switch hands with the black and gray Nightfall. As fate would have it, you can also do that if you have the San Diego Comic-Con version. As you can see, those fists are a perfect match, and of course that works the other way around. The challenge, of course, is getting a hold of one of these. As for Mattel, the only character-specific accessories he comes with is this unmasked head and this cowl piece to drape over his neck. While Marvel Legends had already been doing something similar, this was a relatively new concept for Mattel, and I have to say I do really like it. Obviously, the McFarlane version doesn't have an unmasked head, but if you saw my video on the regular edition, you'd know that I recommended the unmasked red hood for that same effect. Seeing them side by side with the Mattel version, I do really think it works. Beyond that, and Dick comes with the left leg of Killer Croc. What's funny to me is that they actually gave the Build-A-Figure ankle pivot, but not the figure it comes with. Where McFarlane really excels over Mattel is the cape. Yes, Mattel's is fabric, but McFarlane's is wired. Based on comments, I know a lot of you would have preferred McFarlane to stick with the plastic capes, but I gotta say, I am completely sold on the wired ones. They just add so much display potential. But playability is more than just capes and croc legs, it's also about how well your figure plays with others. Starting with the Robin to Dick Grayson's Batman, and here are Mattel and Page Puncher's versions of Damian Wayne. Rounding out the rest of the Bat family though are Mattel and McFarlane versions of Tim Drake's red and black costume. But for a couple of other options, here's the Rebirth Robin that came in that same Killer Croc wave, and the Infinite Frontier Robin that was incorrectly labeled as Rebirth. I unfortunately don't have the Killer Croc wave red hood, but here's DC Essentials and 3 Jokers. For a couple of Batgirls, here's a Mattel Barbara and McFarlane Cassandra Cain. As for Dick Grayson's other moniker Nightwing, here's DC Icons and Better Than Batman. For another figure from the Killer Croc wave, and here's Alfred along with the Batman Forever version, which will be getting his own review very, very soon. Veering into villainy, and here's DC Universe Classics and Deadly Duo versions of the Joker. But for a couple of other options, and here's DC Direct and McFarlane versions of Arkham Asylum. Since she was still rocking the Jester costume at this point, and here we have Mattel and DC Essentials versions of Harley Quinn, Mattel Penguin along with McFarlane's in his neon sanitation vest, Mattel and McFarlane versions of Catwoman, and Mattel and McFarlane versions of Classic Riddler. For the most important comparison though, and here we have Bruce. This is the Gotham City 5-pack version by Mattel and the black and gray version of Nightfall by McFarlane, Mattel and McFarlane versions of Hush, which required me to do some creative cape work to fit him in frame, and then for a couple of video game options, Mattel and McFarlane versions of Arkham Asylum and Arkham City respectively. For a relative scale comparison, and here are Batman's Reborn with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man, and as always, here they are with Stealth Iron Man. I can't see you, but I know you're judging me. Of course, I'm sure at least some of you would like to see a couple of head swaps. First up is the SDCC Nightfall. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed by how well this works. The blues match up pretty seamlessly. There is a slight discrepancy though because of some of the painted shading. Also, the gray on Batman Reborn is slightly cooler and slightly darker. Even so, this looks really good. A lot of it does depend on how you feel about Batman with black in his mask. For those hoping for a trunk swap, those have actually been glued down, so that's gonna have to wait for another time. That said, and swapping an arm, you can see what I mean about the grays not matching. Keep in mind though that with one figure being a Platinum Edition and the other being a con exclusive, any customs you'd want to do with them would be very expensive. Next up, and just because he's blue, here we have the Phygital version of Rebirth. Proportion-wise, this works pretty well, though obviously the blues are a bit off. If you were hoping to mix and match other parts, the grays are a bit off as well. I do like this head on this body, you just need to darken it up a bit. Here we have Speeding Bullets. With a little bit of retooling, the Speeding Bullets body has the potential of being the perfect buck for bulkier heroes like Batman and Superman, though I do think Dick Grayson works best being a bit lankier. Side by side, this shows what great variety there could be. I'm not entirely sure what you would do with this combination, but hopefully it sparks your imagination. Speaking of the Speeding Bullets body, I did get a request to see the Action Comics 1000 Superman head and Trunks on the Fusion version of Batman and Superman. To me, this is just more confirmation that the Speeding Bullets body would be fantastic if they just got rid of that extra ribbing. With both versions having plenty of other figures to scale with, it really does come down to accessories and play features. Offering an alternate head was definitely a step in the right direction for Mattel, but this Batman can't even throw a punch. McFarlane might not have an alternate head, but he does have dynamic hand options and a wired cape that's hard to compete with. For playability, this round also goes to McFarlane. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. New in box, and Mattel is averaging on the aftermarket for between $35 to $40, 20 if you're willing to buy him loose without a killer croc piece. As for McFarlane, unless you're one of the lucky ones to find him on shelf, he's going to set you back between $45 and $50. Again, I still feel like this should have been the standard issue release, and while this might not be the better figure, at least it's been out long enough that the aftermarket prices make sense. For price, this round goes to Mattel, but the battle goes to McFarlane 3-2. For more Batman versus, check out one of these, and until next time, play nice and have fun.